Nature and Books. What is the colour of a dandelion? There are many dandelions. That which I mean flowers in May, when the meadow grass has started and the hares are busy by daylight. That which flowers very early in the year has a thickness of hue and is not interesting. In autumn the dandelions quite change their colour and are pale. The right dandelion for this question is the one that comes about in May, with a very broad disc and in such quantities as often cover a whole meadow. I used to admire them very much in the fields by Surbiton, strong clay soil, and also on the towing path of the Thames, where the sward is very broad, opposite Long Ditton. Indeed, I have often walked up that towing path on a beautiful sunny morning, when all was quiet except the nightingales in the palace hedge, on purpose to admire them. I dare say they are all gone now forevermore. Still, it is a pleasure to look back on anything beautiful. What colour is this dandelion? It is not yellow, nor orange, nor gold. Put a sovereign on it and see the difference. They say the gypsies call it Queen's Great Hairy Dog Flower, a number of words to one stalk, and so, to get a colour to it, you may call it the yellow gold orange plant. In the winter, on the black mud under a dark dripping tree, I found a piece of orange pale lately dropped, a bright red-orange speck in the middle of the blackness. It looked very beautiful and instantly recalled to my mind the great dandelion discs in the sunshine of the summer. Yet certainly they are not red-orange. Perhaps if 10 people answered this question, they would each give different answers. Again, a bright day or a cloudy, the presence of a slight haze, or the juxtaposition of other colours alters it very much. For the dandelion is not a glazed colour like the buttercup, but sensitive. It is like a sponge and adds to its own hue that which is passing, sucking it up. The shadow of the trees in the wood, why are they blue? Ought they not to be dark? Is it really blue or an illusion? What is their colour when you see the shadow of a tall trunk aslant in the air like a leaning pillar? The fallen brown leaves, wet with dew, have a different brown from those that are dry, and the upper surface of the green growing leaf is different from the undersurface. The yellow butterfly, if you meet one in October, has so toned down its spring yellow that you might fancy him a pale green leaf floating along the road. There is a shining, quivering, gleaming. There is a changing, fluttering, shifting. There is a mixing, weaving, varnished wings, translucent wings, wings with dots and veins all playing over the purple heath. A very tangle of many-toned lights and hues. Then come the apples. If you look upon them from an upper window, so as to glance along the level plane of the fruit, delicate streaks of scarlet, like those that lie in parallel to the eastern horizon before sunrise, golden tints under bronze and apple green, and some that the wasps have hollowed, more glowingly beautiful than the rest. Sober leaves and black and white swallows. To see it you must be high up, as if the apples were strewn in a sward of foliage. So I have gone in 3 steps from May dandelion to September apple, an immense space measured by things beautiful, so filled that 10 folio volumes could not hold the description of them, and I have left out the meadows, the brooks, and the hills. Often in writing about these things, I have felt very earnestly my own incompetence to give the least idea of their brilliancy and many-sided colours. My gamut was so very limited in its terms, and would not give a note to 1 in 1,000 of those I saw. At last I said, I will have more words, I will have more terms, I will have a book and colour, and I will find and use the right technical name for each one of those lovely tints. I was told that the very best book was by Chevreau, which had tinted illustrations, chromatic scales, and all that could be desired. Quite true, all of it, but for me it contained nothing. There was a good deal about assorted wools, but nothing about leaves. Nothing by which I could tell you the difference between the light scarlet of one poppy and the deep purple scarlet of other species. The dandelion remained unexplained, for as the innumerable other flowers and wings and sky colours, they were not even approached. The book, in short, dealt with the artificial and not with nature. Next I went to science, works on optics, such a mass of them. Some I had read in old time and turned to again. Some I had read for on the first time, some translated from the German, and so on. It appeared that, experimenting with physical colour, tangible paint, they had found out that red, yellow and blue were the 3 primary colours, and then experimenting with light itself, with colours not tangible, they found out that red, green and violet were the 3 primary colours, but neither of these would do for the dandelion. Once upon a time I had taken an interest in spectrum analysis, and the theory of the polarization of light was fairly familiar. Any number of books, but not what I wanted to know. Next the idea occurred to me of buying all the colours used in painting and tinting as many pieces of paper a separate hue, and so comparing these with petals and wings and grass and trifolium. This did not answer at all. My unskilful hands made a very poor wash, and the yellow paper set by a yellow petal did not agree. The scientific reason which I cannot enter into now. Secondly, the names attached to many of these paints are unfamiliar to general readers. It is doubtful if bistre, leech's blue, oxide of chromium, and so on, would convey an idea. They might as well be Greek symbols. No use to attempt to describe hues of heath or hill in that way. These two are only distinct colours. What was to be done with all the shades and tones? Still there remained the language of the studio. Without a doubt a master of painting could be found who would quickly supply the technical term of anything I liked to show him. But again no use, because it would be technical. And a still more insurmountable difficulty occurs insofar as I have looked at pictures, and it seems as if the artists have met with the same obstacle in paints as I have in words, that is to say, a deficiency. Either painting is incompetent to express the extreme beauty of nature, or in some way the canons of art forbid the attempt. Therefore I had to turn back, throw down my books with a bang, and get me to a bit of fallen timber in the open air to meditate. Would it be possible to build up a fresh system of colour language by means of natural objects? Could we say pinewood green, larch green, spruce green, wasp yellow, humblebee amber? And there are fungi that have marked tints. but the Latin names of these agarics are not pleasant. Butterfly blue, but there are several varieties, and this plan is interfered with by two things. First, that almost every single item of nature, however minute, has got a distinctly different colour, so that the dictionary of tints would be immense. And next, so very few would know the object itself, that the colour attached to it would have no meaning. The power of language has been gradually enlarging for a great length of time, and I venture to say that the English language at the present time can express more and is more subtle, flexible, and at the same time vigorous than any of which we possess a record. When people talk to me about studying Sanskrit or Greek or Latin or German or still more absurd French, I feel as if I could fell them with a mallet happily. Study the English and you will find everything there, I reply. With such a great language, I fully anticipate, in years to come, a great development in the power of expressing thoughts and feelings which are now thoughts and feelings only. How many have said of the sea, "It makes me feel something I cannot say." Hence it is clear there exists in the intellect a layer, if I may so call it, of thought yet dumb, chambers within the mind which require a key of new words to unlock. Whenever that is done, a fresh impetus is given to human progress. There are 1,000,000 books, and yet with all their aid I cannot tell you the colour of a May dandelion. There are 3 greens at this moment in my mind, that of the leaf of the flower de luce, that of the yellow iris leaf, and that of the bayonet-like leaf of the common flag. With admission to 1,000,000 books, how am I to tell you the difference between these tints? How many, many books, and such a very, very little bit of nature in them. Though we have been so many thousand years upon the earth, we do not seem to have done any more as yet than walk along beaten footpaths, and sometimes really it would seem as if there was something in the minds of many men quite artificial, quite distinct from the sun and trees and hills, altogether house people, whose gods must be set in 4-cornered buildings. There is nothing in books that touches my dandelion. But it grows, ah yes, it grows. How does it grow? Builds itself up somehow of sugar and starch, and turns mud into bright colour and dead earth into food for bees, and someday perhaps for you, and knows when to shut its petals, and how to construct the brown seeds to float with the wind, and how to please the children, and how to puzzle me. Ingenious dandelion. If you find out that its correct botanical name is Leontodon taraxacum, or Leontodon dons leonis, that will bring it into botany, and there is a place called Dandelion Castle in Kent, and a bell with the inscription John de Dandelion and his great dog brought over this bell on a mill cog, which is about as relevant as the mere words Leontodon taraxacum. Botany is the knowledge of plants according to the accepted definition. Naturally, therefore, when I begin to think I would like to know a little more of flowers than could be learned by seeing them in the fields, I went to botany. Nothing could be more simple you by a book which first of all tells you how to recognize them, how to classify them, next instructs you in their uses, medicinal or economical, next tells you about the folklore and curious associations, next enters into a lucid explanation of the physiology of the plant and its relation to other creatures, and finally, and most important, supplies you with the ethical feeling, the ideal aspiration to be identified with each particular flower. One moderately thick volume would probably suffice for such a modest round as this. Lo, now the labour of Hercules, when he set about bringing up Cerberus from below, and all the work done by Apollo in the years when he ground corn, are but a little matter compared with the attempt to master botany. Great minds have been at it these 2,000 years, and yet we are still only nibbling at the edge of the leaf, as the ploughboys bite the young hawthorn in spring. The mere classification, all plant law was a vast chaos, till there came a man of Sweden, the great Linnaeus, till the sexes were recognized, and everything was ruled out and set in its place again. The mere classification, all plant law was a vast chaos, till there came the man of Sweden, the great Linnaeus, till the sexes were recognized, and everything was ruled out and set in place again. The wonderful man, I think it would be true to say it was Linnaeus who set the world on its present twist of thinking, and levered our mental globe a little more perpendicular to the ecliptic. He actually gathered the dandelion and took to bits of it like a scientific child. He touched nature with his fingers instead of sitting looking out of the window. Perhaps the first man who has ever done so for 1700 years or so, since superstition blighted the progress of pagan Rome. The work he did, but no one reads Linnaeus now. The folios, indeed, might moulder to dust without loss, because his spirit has got into the minds of men, and the text is of little consequence. The best book he wrote to read now is the delightful Tour in Lapland, with its quaint pen and ink sketches so realistically vivid, as if the thing sketched had been banged on the paper and so left its impress. I have read it 3 times, and I still cherish the old yellow pages. It is the best botanical book written by the greatest of botanists, specially sent on a botanical expedition, and it contains nothing about botany. It tells you about the canoes and the hard cheese and the Laplander's warehouse on top of a pole like a pigeon house, and the innocent way in which the maiden helped the traveller in his bath, and how the aged men ran so fast that the devil could not catch them. And best of all, because it gives a smack in the face to modern pseudo-scientific medical cant about hygiene, showing how the Laplanders break every law, human and divine, ventilation, bath and diet, all the trash, and therefore enjoy the most excellent health, and live to a great old age. Still, I have not succeeded in describing the immense labour there was in learning to distinguish plants on the Linnaean system. Then comes in order of time the natural system, the geographical distribution. Then there is the geological relationship, so to say, to Pliocene plants, natural selection and evolution. Of that let us say nothing, let sleeping dogs lie, and evolution is a very weary dog. Most charming, however, will be found the latest studies of naturalists on the interdependence of flowers and insects. There is another work the dandelion has got to do. Endless, endless botany. Where did the plants come from at first? Did they come creeping up out of the sea at the edge of the estuaries and suddenly run their roots into the ground and so make the green earth? Did man come out of the sea as the Greeks thought? There are so many ideas in plants. Flora, with a full lap, scattering knowledge and flowers together. Everything is good, and sweet seems to come out of flowers, up to the very highest thoughts of the soul, and we carry them daily to the very threshold of the other world. Next you may try the microscope and its literature, and find the crystals in the rhubarb. I remember taking sly glances when I was a very little boy at an old Culpeper's herbal, heavily bound in leather and curiously illustrated. It was so deliciously wicked to read about the poisons, and I thought perhaps it was a book like that, only in papyrus rolls, that was used by the sorcerers who got ready the poisoned mushrooms in old Rome. Youth's ideas are so imaginative and bring together things that are so widely separated. Conscience told me I had no business to read about poisons, but there was a fearful fascination in hemlock, and I recollect tasting a little bit. It was very nasty. At this day, nevertheless, if anyone wishes to begin a pleasant, interesting, unscientific acquaintance with English plants, he would do very well indeed to get a good copy of Culpeper. Grey hairs had insisted in showing themselves in my beard when, all those weary years afterwards, I thought I would like to buy the still older Englishman, Gerard, who had no Linnaeus to guide him, who walked about our English lanes centuries ago. What wonderful scenes he must have viewed when they were all a tangle of wild flowers, and plants that are now scarce were common, and the old ploughs, and the curious customs, and the wild red deer. It would make a good picture. It really would, Gerard studying English orchids. Such a volume. Hundreds of pages, yellow of course, close type, and marvellously well printed. The minute care they must have taken in those early days of printing to get up such a book, a wonderful volume both in bodily shape and contents. Just then the only copy I could hear of was much damaged. The cunning old bookseller said he could make it up, but I have no fancy for patched books. They are not genuine. I would rather have them deficient, and the price was rather long, so I went Gerardless. Of folklore and medicinal use and history and associations here you have hints. The bottom of the sack is not yet. There are the monographs, years of study expended upon one species of plant, growing in one locality perhaps, some made up into thick books, and some into broad quarto pamphlets with the most beautiful plates that if you were to see them would tempt you to cut them out and steal them, all sunk and lost like dead ships under the sand, piles of monographs. There are warehouses in London that are choked to the beams of the roof with them, and every fresh exploration furnishes another shelf load. The source of the Nile was unknown a very few years ago, and now I have no doubt that there are dozens of monographs on the flowers that flourish there. Indeed, there is not a thing that grows that may not furnish a monograph. The author spends perhaps 20 years in collecting his material, during which time he must of course come across a great variety of amusing information, and then he spends another 10 years writing out a fair copy of his labours. Then he thinks it does not quite do in that form, so he snips a paragraph out of the beginning and puts it at the end. Next he shifts some more matter from the middle to the preface. Then he thinks it over. It seems to him that it was too big. It wants condensation. The scientific world will say he has made too much of it. It ought to read very slight and present the facts while concealing the labour. So he sets about removing the superfluous, leaves out all the personal observations and all the little adventures he has met with on his investigations, and so, having got it down to the dry bones and stones thereof, and omitted all the mortar that stuck them together, he sends for the engraver, and the next 3 years are occupied in working up the illustrations. About this time, some new discovery is made by a foreign observer, which necessitates a complete revision of the subject, and so, having shifted the contents of the book about hither and thither, till he does not know which is the end and which is the beginning, he patches the new mutilated copy into a drawer and turns the key. Farewell. No more of this. His declining days shall be spent in peace. A few months afterwards, a work is announced in Leipzig, which really trenches on my favourite subject, and really, after spending a lifetime, I can't stand it. By this time his handwriting has become so shaky he can hardly read it himself, so he sends in despair for a lady who works a typewriter. With infinite patience she makes a clean manuscript of the muddled mess. To the press at last, and the proofs come rapidly. Such a relief. How joyfully easy a thing is when you set about it. But by and by this won't do. Subsection A ought to be in a footnote. Family B is doubtful. And so the corrections grow and run over into the margin in a thin treble hand, till they approach the bulk of the original book, a good profit for the printer. And so, after about 40 years, the monograph is published. The work of a life is accomplished. 50 copies are sent round to as many public libraries and learned societies, and the rest of the impression lies on the shelves till dust and time and spiders' webs have buried it. Splendid work in it too, looked back upon from today with the keen modern thought. These monographs often contain a whole chest of treasure, and still there are periodicals, a century of magazines and journals and reviews and notices that have been coming out these 100 years and dropping to the ground like dead leaves unnoticed. And then there are artworks, books about shape and colour and ornament, and a naturalist lately has been trying to see how the leaves of one tree look fitted on the boughs of another. Boundless is the wealth of Flora's lap. The ingenuity of man has been weaving wreaths out of it for ages, and still the bottom of the sack is not yet. For we have such news of the dandelion, for I sit on the thrown timber under the trees and meditate, and I want something more. I want the soul of the flowers. The bee and the butterfly take their pollen and their honey, and the strange moths so curiously coloured, like the curious colouring of the owls, come to them by night, and they turn towards the sun and live their little day, and their petals fall. And where is the soul when the body decays? I wonder the inner meaning and the understanding of the wild flowers in the meadow. Why are they? What end? What purpose? The plant knows and sees and feels. Where is its mind when the petal falls? Absorbed in the universal dynamic force, or what? They make no shadow of pretense, these beautiful flowers, of being beautiful for my sake, of bearing honey for me. In short, there does not seem to be any kind of relationship between us. And yet, as I said just now, language does not express the dumb feelings of the mind any more than the flowers can speak. I want to know the soul of the flowers, but the word soul does not in the smallest degree convey the meaning of my wish. It is quite inadequate. I hope that you will grasp the drift of my meaning. All these life-laboured monographs, these classifications, works of Linnaeus and our own classic Darwin, microscope, physiology, and the flower has not yet given us its message. There are a million books. There are no books. All the books have to be written. What a field. A whole million of books has got to be written. In this sense, there are hardly a dozen of them, and these mere primers. The thoughts of man are like the foraminifera, those minute shells which build up on the solid chalk hills and lay the level plain of endless sand, so minute that save with a powerful lens you would never imagine the dust on your fingers to be more than dust. The thoughts of man are like these. Each of him seems great in his day, but the ages roll and they shrink till they become triturated dust, and you might, as it were, put 1,000 on your thumbnail. They are not shapeless dust for all that. They are organic, and they build and weld and grow together, till in the passage of time they will make a new earth and a new life. So I think I may say there are no books. There are books yet to be written. Let us get a little alchemy out of the dandelions. They were not precise, the Arabian sages, with their flowing robes and handwriting. There was a large margin to their manuscripts, such imagination. Therein they failed, judged by the monograph standards, but give a subtle food for the mind. Some of this I would fain see now inspiring the works and words of our great men of science and thought, a little alchemy. A great change is slowly going forward over all the printing press world. I mean whenever men print books and papers. The Chinese are perhaps outside that world at present, and the other Asian races, the myriads too of the great southern islands and of Africa. The change is steadily, however, proceeding wherever the printing press is used. Nor Pope, nor Kaiser, nor Tsar, nor Sultan, nor fanatic monk, nor Mesuin shouting in vain from his mironet, nor most fanatic at all, the fanatic shouting in vain in London, can keep it out, all powerless against a bit of printed paper. Bits of printed paper that listen to no command, to which none can say, "Stand back, thou shalt not enter." They rise on the summer whirlwinds from the very dust of the road, and float over the highest walls. They fall on the well-kept lawns, monastery, prison, palace. There is no fortress against a bit of printed paper. They penetrate even where Dante's gold cannot go. Our Darwins, our Lyells, Herschels, Faradays, all the immense army of those that go down to nature with considering eye, are steadfastly undermining and obliterating the superstitious past, literally burying it under endless loads of accumulated facts. And the printing presses, like so many Argos, take these facts on their voyage round the world, overgo temples and minarets and churches, or rather they stay the hollow shells, like the snail shells which thrushes have picked clean. There they stay like Karnak, where there is no more incense, like the stone circles on our own hills, where there are no more human sacrifices. Thus men's mind all over the printing press world are unlearning the falsehoods that have bound them down so long. They are unlearning the first step to learn. They are going down to nature and taking up the clods with their own hands and coming to have touch of what is real. And yet we were in the fact stage. By and by we shall come to the alchemy and get the honey for the inner mind and soul. I found, therefore, from the dandelion that there were no books, and it came upon me, believe me, as a great surprise, for I had lived quite certain that I was surrounded with them. It is nothing but unlearning, I found now. 5,000 books to unlearn. Then to unlearn the first ideas of history, of science, of social institutions, to unlearn one's own life and purpose, to unlearn the old mode of thought and way of arriving at things, to take off peel after peel, and to get by degrees slowly towards the truth. Thus writing, as it were, a sort of floating book in the mind, almost remaking the soul. It seems as if the chief value of books is to give us something to unlearn. Sometimes I feel indignant at the false views that were instilled into me in early days, and then I see that in very indignation gives me a moral life. I hope in the days to come future thinkers will unlearn us and find ideas infinitely better. How marvellous it seems that there should be found communities furnished with the printing press and fully convinced that they are more intelligent than ants, yet deliberately refusing by a solid popular vote to accept free libraries. They look with scorn on the medieval times when volumes were chained in the college library or to the desk at church. Ignorant times those. A good thing it would be if only 3 books were chained to a desk, open and free in any parish throughout the kingdom now. So might the wish to unlearn be at last started in the inner mind of the mass. Almost the only books left to me to read, and not to unlearn very much, are my first books, the graven classics of Greece and Rome, cut with a stylus so deeply into the tablet they cannot be erased. Little of the monograph or of classification, no bushel baskets full of facts, no minute dissection of nature, no attempt to find the soul under the scalpel. Thoughts which do not exactly deal with nature direct in a mechanical way, as the chemist labels all his gums and spices and earths in small boxes. I wonder if anybody at Athens ever made a collection of the Colopetra. Yet in some way they had got the spirit of the earth and sea, the soul of the sun. This never dies. This I wish not to unlearn. This is ever fresh and beautiful as a summer morning. Such the golden crocus, fair flower of early spring, the gopher white, and fragrant thyme, and all the unsown beauty, which in moist grounds the verdant meadows bear, the ox-eye, the sweet-smelling flower of Jove, the chalker, and the much-sung hyacinth, and the low-growing violet, to which dark prosperine and dark hue is given. They come nearest to our own violets and cowslips, the unsown beauty of our meadows, to the hawthorn leaf and the high pine wood. I can forget all else that I have read, but it is difficult to forget these, even when I will. I read them in English. I had the usual Latin and Greek instruction, but I read them in English deliberately. For the inflection of the vowel I care nothing. I prize the idea. Scholars may regard me with scorn. I reply with equal scorn. I say that the great classic thought is greater to an English mind in English words than in any other form, and therein fits best this to our life and day. I read them in English first, and intend to do so to the end. I do not know what set me on these books, but I began them when I was about 18. The first of all was Diogenes Laertius's Lives of the Philosophers. It was a happy choice. My good genius, I suppose, for you see I was already fairly well read in modern science, and these old Greek philosophies set me thinking backwards, unwinding and unlearning, and getting to that eidolon which is not to be found in the mechanical heavens of this age. I still read him. I still find new things, quite new because they are so very, very old, and quite true. And with his help I seem to measure a look back upon our thoughts now, as if I had projected myself 1,000 years forward in space. An imperfect book, say the critics. I do not know about that. His short paragraphs and chapters, in their imperfect state, convey more freshness to the mind than the thick laboured volumes in which modern scholarship professes to describe ancient philosophy. I prefer the imperfect original records. Neither can I read the ponderous volumes of modern history, which are nothing but words. I prefer the incomplete and shattered chronicles themselves, where the swords shine and the armour rings, and all life is though but a broken frieze. Next came Plato. It took me a long time to read Plato, and I have had to unlearn much of him, and Xenophon. Socrates' dialectic method taught me how to write, or rather how to put ideas in sequence. Sophocles too, at last, that wonderful encyclopedia of curious things, Athanasius. So I found, with the idea of the 100 best books came out, that between 70 and 80 of them had been my companions almost from boyhood, those lacking to complete the number being chiefly ecclesiastical or continental. Indeed, some years before the 100 books were talked of, the idea had occurred to me of making up a catalogue of books that could be bought for £10. In an article in the Pall Mall Gazette on the pigeons at the British Museum, I said, "It seems as if all the books in the world, really books, can be bought for £10. Man's whole thought is purchasable at that small price, for the value of a watch, of a good dog." The idea of making a £10 catalogue was in my mind. I did make a rough pencil one, and I still think that a £10 library is worth the notice of the publishing world. My rough list did not contain 100. These old books of nature and nature's mind ought to be chained up, free for every man to read in every parish. These are the only books I do not wish to unlearn, one item only excepted that I shall not here discuss. It is curious, too, that the Greek philosophers, in the more rigid sense of science, anticipated most of the drift of modern thought. 2 chapters in Aristotle might be printed without change as summaries of our present natural science. For the facts of nature, of course, neither 100 books nor a £10 library would be worth mentioning. Say 5,000, and having read those, then go to Kew and spend a year studying specimens of wood only stored there, such little slice after the whole. You will then believe what I have advanced, that there are no books as yet. They have got to be written. If we pursue the idea a little further, and consider that these are all the crude clods of life, for I often feel what a very crude and clumsy clod I am, only of the earth, a minute speck among 100 millions of stars. How shall we write what is there? It is only to be written by the mind or soul, and that is why I strive so much to find what I have called the alchemy of nature. Let us not be too entirely mechanical, Baconian, and experimental only. Let us let the soul hope and dream and float on these oceans of accumulated facts, and feel greater still aspiration than it has ever known since first a flint was chipped before the glaciers. Man's mind is the most important fact with which we are yet acquainted. Let us not turn then against it and deny its existence, with too many brazen instruments. But remember that these are means, and the vast lens of the Californian refractor is but glass. It is the infinite speck upon which the ray of light will fall. That is the one great fact of the universe. By the mind, without instruments, the Greeks anticipated almost all our thoughts. By and by, having raised ourselves up upon these huge mounds of facts, we shall begin to see still greater things. To do so, we must look not at the mound under the foot, but at the starry horizon.